Hey friends, welcome back for another episode of Holy Ourselves, a podcast about becoming more authentic in our faith, especially around our sexuality and gender. And I'm back for another solo episode. You know, I started this back in June, with two initially episodes that were just me talking. And then I just got to have three really amazing interviews with incredible people. Destin Land, who wrote the book The Rules We Live By on unlearning patriarchal masculinity. We talked about masculinity and gender and all the things surrounding it. Then got to have Timon Lee on to talk about minority stress, especially focusing on minority stress of LGBT people within the church. And then also got to have him on for a bonus episode of the Patreon page, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. But he did a research project for his master's on celibate partnerships and how they're formed and how they're sustained. And so we got to talk about that on the Patreon page, and that was great. And then finally, I just got to have Emily Blaylock on, who works for the Palm Beach County Victim Services here in South Florida, where I live. And we were doing an event, which I'm also going to talk about today, about creating safe religious spaces when it comes to sexual violence. So she came on and we talked about how churches can effectively and lead, well when it comes to sexual violence. The great thing is I've gotten to know each of them apart from these interviews. And Emily especially is a local friend, and it was really fun to dive in with her. I did want to acknowledge one thing from that episode. If you listen to the whole thing, you probably could tell we had a few hiccups along the way with recording. The biggest thing was that I'm still figuring out these setups. Even now, you can't really see it, but I have a few new pieces of my setup here, which is really, really great to have. And when I was setting up with Emily, I had her hooked up to one device and me hooked up to another device. I think I even said that day it was such a crazy setup, but it worked. The problem I was having is a few times her audio stopped recording. So I pieced it together, but there was a few places where I didn't feel like I could really do it smoothly enough. So I needed a transition. And if you watched on YouTube, you probably got it better. But I did get a few people, just like two, going, "What was that noise?" And the noise was, it said in that weird voice, "A few moments later." If you don't know the reference, it's from SpongeBob, because I think it happens a few times in SpongeBob. I'm showing myself as a 90s kid. And probably early 2000s too. But it was like it just kept coming up in my brain every single time we had to pause and restart, and going a few moments later, and then 2,000 years later, because sometimes it felt like 2,000 years. But we got there. And I'm so glad we were able to do it. And because there was a moment there where I was like, maybe this is just going to be an audio podcast. And that's not bad. I honestly prefer it. This whole setup of talking to you and kind of having this all together, it's a lot, but I want to try, like I said before, of doing something a little bit different. I'm working on this office I got my new little bookshelf over here. If you are on YouTube, it's like one of those tree bookshelves. And so I'm very glad I got to put it up today. So working on decorating this office, obviously there's a lot here, but I'm glad to be back with you guys. So for today, I want to give you a few updates about the podcast and just some technical stuff. And then I kind of want to touch on a few different topics. Mostly I want to kind of go back over these topics that we talked about with Destin and Timon and Emily. So, because I've had further thoughts as I've processed it, and there's been a few things that more stuff has developed, just like the event that I did with Emily, those kinds of things. So I wanted to talk about that. So we're going to touch a little bit more just on these topics that you've gotten to listen to so far. So before we get into the thematic topics, I wanted to give a few more updates about this podcast. Like I said, this is still a very new podcast. I'm learning what this podcast is going to be. There might be a future where I'm not doing these solo episodes, so who knows? But so far, I'm doing them. And I am learning what this is going to look like. So I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But I wanted to give you guys an update on my Patreon page. So there's a chance later on I'm going to be doing ads in episodes. I mentioned that towards the beginning. As, listens develop and those things that might be happening. But for right now, I'm wanting to really focus in on my Patreon. Last time I spoke to you all, in a solo episode at least, I mentioned that right now I am keeping it pretty simple and I'm just doing a bonus episode a month. And at the time I was talking also about doing it like going through the Bible. I still like the idea. I'm not going to do that. I'll explain what I'm going to do now, which is still going to involve that, but that's not going to be the full thing. So sit with me on this. So I fleshed out a little bit more of the tiers, and I wanted to share that with you in case this interests you in a way of supporting and getting more content and getting more resources for you. So the lowest tier, which is $5 a month, is later on, it may involve ad-free episodes. Right now, because I don't have ads, I'm releasing episodes early. I'm not guaranteeing how early I'm going to release them, but I'm going to release them as early as I can. So it might be a few days. It could be a week, these kinds of things. But getting you some episodes early, not just some episodes, but getting you the episodes as early as I can. And then if there comes a time when I'm doing ads in the episodes, I'm going to switch it to you get ads free episodes. Along with that, there is a bonus episode every month. I'm trying to release it on the 15th of the month where I'm talking to you like this. I'm going to talk a little bit of different, it's going to be different than these main episodes. So let me go ahead and do that. I was going to talk about it a little bit later, but I'll go ahead and talk about it now. What makes the bonus episodes different than these main solo episodes? The main way I've been processing this is think of it as these episodes that you're listening to right now are front porch conversations, a bit more polished, a bit more fleshed out, and these kinds of things. The Patreon episodes, you're going to get a little bit more of my unfiltered thoughts. Not that there's anything bad in what I'm saying that I'm trying to hide from this main podcast, but sometimes many of you know, if you've heard me over time, I am a verbal processor. I process things in real time. And I've learned a little bit how to know when to process and when to shut my mouth for another time. And so there's going to be a little bit more of shut my mouth on these main episodes. But you're not going to get that you're going to get a lot more of here's the random thing I'm thinking through. And maybe you might be processing it with me. So that's going to be a little bit of the difference in between these episodes. So I am still going to engage on these. When I had first come up with the idea of going through the Bible, and I was going to each time engage with a different book of the Bible and what it says about sexuality, not necessarily in a moral code kind of way, but what are the reflections that it has to give us beyond a moral code. And I still like it. I'm a Bible nerd. I could sit there talking about it, but it just felt a little clunky in my first episodes. And, we're on this journey together. So I think the way I'm going to be doing it is it's going to be a little bit more of, here's the things I want to talk to you about, and end it with a reflection that comes from a book of the Bible. And I'm going to go in order. So this month it's going to be Leviticus. That's going to be a fun reflection. No, it will not be about the moral code kind of crap. It's not going to be about dissecting those. I think we as the church have done Leviticus dirty in many ways because there's a lot of beauty in that book and it seems really hard to understand. And I would like to have a reflection to pull something out of it that can maybe show us that Leviticus doesn't just have to be about fire and brimstone in the different crazy things that it says. Crazy. So that's going to be an idea. So then I want to kind of go through. It'll be Leviticus and then Numbers and then Deuteronomy and all the way through. I have a lot of different ideas for a lot of the different books. And I just really want to show that the whole Bible has beautiful things to say about our sexuality. And it's often been pressed into a specific way for us to be forced just to behave well rather than being formed into the likeness of Christ. So that's all for tier one. Early episodes and one monthly bonus episode of just me. Then the $10 second tier is going to be quarterly interviews. I got this idea after Timon and I recorded that extra episode. I'm not going to promise that every month. I might be able to do them more than quarterly, but at least they will be quarterly. So every 3 months. And you'll get a bonus episode, bonus interview, maybe with a guest that was on the main podcast or a special person I invite on. Along with that, there's going to be backstage kind of like opportunities to help me formulate stuff, whether topics to talk about, questions to ask interviewers in this kind of thing, so that then you'll be able to kind of form where the podcast is going in that way. So there's going to be a lot with that. The third tier is $25. And this is kind of fun. I am working on multiple different projects right now, because when am I not? And I am going to be doing, I think I said quarterly. It might be a little bit more than that. It's at least quarterly. Allowing you to read or listen to drafts of some of the things I'm working on and getting your input in it, along with then when I actually am releasing stuff, getting launch team kind of access with those things. So that's going to be the $25 tier, plus everything else that's come before. That's kind of goes without saying. Each tier gets what the other tiers had. And then there's also a $50 tier and $100 tier. And some of that is just you like my work and you want to help me do it more, not just what I do here on the podcast, but it also helps me provide spiritual direction at lower rates for people who can't afford spiritual direction at my regular rate. Plus, I just kind of honestly, if you're willing to give $100 a month, I'll name my next biological child after you. I don't know if it's going to happen, but if it does, I'll do it. So there you go. There's probably going to be some more benefits coming for those top 2 tiers later on, just some special things. But that's where I have right now. So if you love this work that I'm doing and you are interested in more or just supporting it, please go to patreon.com/holyourselves and you can check out more stuff there. So as we dive into this, the first thing I actually want to talk about has nothing to do with the interviews that I did before. What a coincidence. I'm literally already breaking my plan. But some of you may have seen on the Holy Ourselves Instagram account that I posted about the Pulse nightclub shooting crosswalk being removed. As you all know, I am in Florida, which is an interesting state to be in this moment as an LGBT person. And as I've said previously, I'm not here to this is not a political podcast, but I do believe that faith and sexuality are so embedded in who we are. It's kind of hard. And also it gets really complicated with faith and sexuality in politics, because politics really likes to touch on both a lot. So it's kind of unavoidable to talk about politics to some level. So this is what we're going to do. Being in Florida, it's really interesting in this moment to be in Florida. You know, when I was growing up, Florida was kind of always seen as an LGBT haven of the South. We have such a thriving LGBTQ community here in South Florida, up in Orlando, even Tampa does too. So it's weird in this moment, especially now, as many of you might know, the DeSantis administration has put forward through the Department of Transportation, has put forward this memo saying that there can't be colorful crosswalks. Basically, all of them have to be uniform, which is just the basic, coloring of the roads and so forth. And I'll be honest, when I first heard about the crosswalks, I was like, okay. I mean, I was frustrated, but I wasn't pissed off because it's a crosswalk. It's colors. Whatever. I felt like there was more important things, and it felt a little bit like a deflection from the real issues of healthcare and rights and protections and these kinds of things. So when I first heard it, I really didn't want to get involved because I was just like, I just don't want to take the bait. That's it. But then a few weeks ago, maybe last week, week before, something like that, the Department of Transportation went in the night and removed the rainbow crosswalk at the Pulse nightclub shooting. If you are not familiar, which I hope you do get familiar. The Pulse nightclub shooting happened at Pulse, a nightclub in Orlando, back in 2016, 9 years ago, this year, and killed 49 people, countless more wounded. At the time, it was the largest mass shooting in the United States. It is now the second largest mass shooting in the United States. And there is something about that memorial if you are listening and you don't understand the importance of the Pulse nightclub shooting for the LGBTQ community, let me help you understand. I literally just talked about this in a sermon on Sunday and at my church. For LGBT people, gay clubs, nightclubs, queer bars, Christians, we often have idea of what they are, the places of debauchery. And I'm not here to defend the many things that happen in nightclubs, in any nightclub. It's not just gay nightclubs, it's any nightclub. But in gay nightclubs, I think one of the beautiful things about those spaces for queer people is that it is a safe space away from the hatred, away from the judgment, away from this, whatever the thing is, hate crimes, hate speech, just the weird looks. It's a space away from all of that. It is our space. And I used to dance at Pulse back in the day, and I have personally even memories there. But there was something when that nightclub shooting happened that hit queer people around the world saying, oh, even in our own spaces, we're not safe. That shook people to a whole new level. And so there's something different from the crosswalk at the Pulse nightclub shooting being removed, and also for it to be removed in the dead of night when the memorial had gotten permission from the state, not even just the city, from the state previously to have this crosswalk there. It is basically part of the memorial. And to have that removed, it is much more than a crosswalk. It is a memorial of lives lost. It is an erasure of people. It is an erasure of pain. It is an erasure of a people group. And I just kept thinking, if this was a war memorial, people would be outraged. Like if there had been some kind of crosswalk next to a war memorial that was painted in a certain way for that memorial, people would lose their minds. But because it is a LGBT memorial, it's debauchery, it's sin, it's all of these things. So that's fine. Get rid of it. We don't need to see it. When it's actually lives lost, something that should make Christians furious. And that just really bothered me. Like I mentioned, I talked about Pulse in a sermon this Sunday, which I'll put in the show notes if you want to hear it. I was talking about the Good Samaritan story. And I think that as we go about this, going into the actual episodes, that the interviews that we talked about with Timon talking about minority stress, if you've never experienced minority stress or don't think you've experienced it, it might have seemed like a weird conversation. Maybe. The Pulse nightclub shooting is an example of minority stress. And what I mean by that, not like the actual shooting, but the way it impacts people. The removal of this crosswalk is an example of minority stress. It is an example of something that if you don't experience it, if you're not part of that minority, if you're not part of that marginalized group, you look at it and go, oh, cool, why is that why is that bothering you so much? You don't see the complexity of what it means, what it is saying, what it's intended to say to a people group that you are not safe, that you do not have dignity. So I think that one of the hardest things with minority stress, going into minority stress and all of this, is noticing it. We talked in the episode with Timon about the minority stress we experience in church, or the minority stress we experience in our lives coming out of the closet. I think what people often don't realize is minority stress carries over into your life, especially depending on the spaces that you continue to occupy. For me, like, the very fact that I've decided to work in a church and be a spiritual director, the very fact that I decide to be in the church means I'm going to engage in minority stress. It means I'm going to have this nuanced awareness of how I'm showing up, what I'm saying, what people are thinking, how they're perceiving things, how they're receiving things. And all of that's going through in my mind when they're just going about their day. And obviously, we all are dealing with these micro stresses, but there are specific ways that it's going to target different people differently based on these identities, based on these experiences, which, by the way, there's an episode coming up on identity, and I'm so excited for it. I'm going to have a friend of mine. I'll wait to say who it is. But an amazing friend of mine, we were already talking about it a few weeks ago, and I was like, you have to come on this podcast and we have to talk about identity, because it'll even build on some of those minority stress things that we were talking about. The reality is, though, if we can't notice the stresses that are happening, it's going to take an even bigger toll. One of the reasons why I can step into this space that I do a lot is because I understand what it does to me. I see how it hits my body, how it hits my mind, how it hits my soul. And at least the awareness of it that immediately happens allows me to know how to take care of myself in that way. So when the Pulse nightclub shooting happened, that's obviously an extreme version. And well, let me take it back. When the removal of the crosswalk of the Pulse nightclub shooting happened a few weeks ago, I want to make clear, I'm not going back to the talking about 9 years ago. When the crosswalk was removed, I immediately saw it was hitting my body. I immediately saw, wow, this is hitting me over the head. And I knew I couldn't suddenly stop. I had things to do. I felt compelled to put that post up on the Instagram. And I also just had work. I had sessions. I had things that I had to do. But I knew I also was aware that to keep going, I needed to take a moment. So I ended up just letting anyone know. I talked to my staff at the staff at church and just said, "Hey, I need the rest of the afternoon to sit. I need the rest of the afternoon to process and mourn what this means, that this piece is gone." And I think it's more than just that piece is gone, but this crosswalk is gone, and there's a lot of people that aren't even going to notice it. Depending on your experience, there's so often when you notice something that happens, or something happens to you, or something happens in the news, something happens to your local community, and you see it, you know what's happening, but you know that the other people in your life who love you so dearly are not going to see it unless you maybe talk about it, or it's not going to impact them the same way, maybe because they don't share the same experience as you do. And that's really hard. And so being able to first notice it allows them to go, okay, how do I process this? Like, what do I absolutely have to get done right now? How can I go about this? It's not always about stepping back and taking the afternoon off. Like I said, that was an extreme version. But how can I make the space to breathe? How can I allow my body to understand that we can make it through this? how can I invite God into this place? Because that is that's the big shift that allows it to not weigh us down. I really truly believe the biggest reason, I mean, like, obviously the biggest reason, I was going to say the biggest reason LGBT people leave the church, I mean, the biggest reason is hatred and victimization. So let's take that down a notch. I think even then you see another major reason LGBT people leave the church, even in situations that seem very loving and caring, is that they haven't learned how to deal with the minority stress and the micro stresses of being in that place that come up even in really loving places. So we really have to learn how to do it. And then our churches, if you're a church leader or our church spaces, we have to learn how to see that in not just our LGBT community members, but so many of our community members that are carrying a lot of different nuanced pain. Building on that, I also want to talk about the sexual violence episode. Afterwards, last Wednesday, a week, or actually 2 Wednesdays ago, I got to sit on the Safe Religious Spaces panel, which we talked about in that episode. It was a event put together by Palm Beach County here in Florida to talk about sexual violence in religious spaces. And so it was a panel of religious leaders and therapists and community leaders to talk about this area. And I was super honored to be on it. I was really nervous because I'm used to going into religious spaces and being the LGBT person. On top of that, being the LGBT person who's celibate or, like those kinds of things. And I wanted to recognize in that space that a lot of the questions I was going to be asked on the panel were going to be about sexual violence against LGBT people in the church, that kind of space. And knowing that a lot of the religious leaders there could be a lot of religious leaders that were in the event who didn't necessarily feel the greatest about LGBT people. I didn't know any of this. I am making a lot of assumptions, but it's a pretty general assumption. If you're going to talk to religious leaders, there's a high likelihood there's going to be a lot of people that don't know how to engage with LGBT issues. And so I was super nervous going in, but I was really glad that I was able to talk about some of the unique experiences of LGBT people. We talked about this a little bit in the episode with Emily, but not as much. And so I wanted to talk about some of the points I brought up there. Number one, I think one thing I brought up in that panel was that LGBT people naturally are already seen as sexual. And not just sexual in like that we're attracted, we have sexual attraction, we have sex, that kind of thing. It was also, it's an idea of us being like sexual deviants. And because of that, there's one side of this sexual violence like conversation that we get accused of sexual violence a lot quicker because everyone assumes all LGBT people are pedophiles. And so I even said in that panel, I have a rule as someone who's in the church that I don't help with kids ministry. I love kids. I think they're great. I've have 20 nieces and nephews, basically. So I've been around kids a lot. I have a lot of experience, but I don't help with kids in church. And it's because of that whole stereotype, which is so damaging. Even in my community where I know everyone, it'd probably be fine. I'm probably being oversafe by deciding not to help with kids ministry. I, in our community, I want to pour into our kids in this way. So going back to my main point, see, it's so funny. I said this was going to be these main episodes are going to be more polished, and here I am just like blah, vomiting on y'all. All of my thoughts. So just imagine the unpolished crap that's going to happen in the Patreon episodes. Madness. Anyway, we are often over-sexualized as deviants. That's one space of it. But I think on the space of LGBT people as victims, because we're already seen as deviants, and then on top of it, our very attraction, our very orientation is seen as broken. Our identities is seen as sinful. Um, when sexual violence happens to us, we are more likely to not report because there is a real fear that we are going to be told it was our fault. Why did we put ourselves in this situation? Why didn't you? Because I've even had Christians tell me, why do you even hang around gay people? Like, because I'm gay, because this is the community that is a part of all of this. So, but the idea that an LGBT person, same sex attracted person, wherever they're at in the journey, that they're in the church, they have something happen to them, and that they don't feel that they can talk to their pastor or to someone in their church without it being brought back on them with shame, that is devastating. Super devastating. And I'm going to put a podcast episode in the episode show notes that was really impactful for me. It has stayed with me for a while. And I was planning on mentioning it in my episode with Emily, but I forgot. And we had so much to talk about. It was fine. I knew I could bring it up now. But there's a biblical scholarship podcast called On Script, which if you are a nerd like me about the Bible, you'll love it. They talk to biblical scholars about their work that they're doing on a variety of things. And they had this one scholar come on, I'm trying to remember her name. What was her name? Erin Heim. And she talked about this work she's been doing about seeing Jesus in his crucifixion as a victim of sexual violence. And the idea of him being stripped naked, the way his body was wounded and flogged and shamed, that there's a lot of parallels to Jesus understanding sexual violence in this way. And we don't make that correlation, but I think it's a really powerful correlation, because being able to identify with Christ in the awful things that this world has done to us, even at the hands of the religious leaders at times, because it is literally the religious leaders that hand over Jesus. It is the pastors. It is the leaders of his community of faith that hand him over and, put him through all of this. I think that's really important for survivors of sexual violence to be able to relate with Christ. That Christ, who embodies our salvation, both in his crucifixion and in his resurrection, that he shares that pain with us, that he understands, because this is the whole Hebrews experience, that we don't have a high priest who doesn't know how to empathize with us, that we have a high priest who understands what we have been through. I think that is super powerful. And I think it's something as I've talked with more sexual violence survivors, I have seen the ways that allows some freedom and healing for them in their faith. That Christ knows what they're going through, and that Christ comforts them, not from a place of superiority in this kind of way, obviously, but from meeting them where they're at. And also that's not the end of Christ's story. The story is resurrection, where yes, Christ has wounds in his hands, holes in his hands, but Christ is made new, and that promise comes to us. And it doesn't erase our experiences, but it invites us into something so much more beautiful. And so I hope that's something that we can take from this. And I hope it can be something helpful for you. It was helpful for me. The last thing I'm going to talk about today is, I shared, if you read my newsletter on Substack, which if you don't, why? No, I'm joking. I can respect, I am a reader. I'm not a blog reader, but I like to write blogs. The irony, right? I know. Crazy. Um, I don't know if I like to write blogs, but I do write blogs, and it's a cursor to writing other things. Anyway, I wrote on my newsletter for September about my briefing or amicus brief that I wrote for a Supreme Court case. So if you haven't heard about it, let me tell you. The Supreme Court is going to be hearing a case in October called Childs versus Salazar. I think it is. I actually haven't had to pronounce this. Y'all, I haven't had to pronounce this. I've just been writing it. Chiles? Chiles? I don't know. It's going to be it. Look it up. All right. Look it up because I'm probably saying it really wrong. I know the second name is Salazar. Y'all, they trusted me to write a briefing. They trusted me, and I can't even pronounce the names. Anyway, so I was approached by some lovely human beings about adding a briefing for this Supreme Court case. And so the Supreme Court case, I couldn't even get past the name. I forgot to tell you what it was about. Colorado has had a law in the books for a while now on that bans conversion therapy for anyone under 18 years old. A therapist in Colorado is suing the state on it, saying that it violates freedom of speech as a therapist, that it's made her not able to work with youth at all, any minors at all on sexuality and gender, and all of these things. Religious freedom is thrown in there as well, that kind of thing. So there was an idea of bringing in religious Christian voices who also represent a traditional view on sexuality and marriage, who can say, hey, this is not necessary. Like what this therapist is saying, that like she needs to be able to talk about changing your orientation or your gender identity in order to help these minors specifically to follow their faith, that's not necessarily true. And to explain a little bit more about this law, I've not always been a fan of laws like this that touch on conversion therapy. Why? Because normally they're written by politicians who don't understand anything of this. It's hard enough for those of us who understand what conversion therapy is to actually talk about it correctly. I don't even like the word conversion therapy because it's not what people who do it use. Like, I really don't like calling something by a term that is not used by the people that promote it. I just don't like it. So, because I don't want people doing it to me, so why am I going to do it to them? The only reason I've been using conversion therapy is because it's literally in the name of the law and it's how it describes it. Normally, I would rather call it, orientation, identity, change efforts, those kinds of things. The other reason why I would like to specify in this is that this law specifically is regulating, again, only for minors, so adults can pursue therapy types for orientation or gender identity change if they desire, but also it only specifies mental health professionals. So prayer ministry at a church, those kinds of things, anything from a pastor's mindset is not included. Often when these laws are put on the books, they are written in such a vague way that honestly, sometimes I've wondered, is my ministry like involved in this? I've seen some laws around the country and around the world where it'll be like, you can't do anything that even helps people change their behavior. And I'm like, how are we saying this? Some of them get very, very vague. So I'm normally not a fan of these laws. But reading this law, I felt it was important to do this as someone who went through reparative therapy, specifically under Dr. Nicolosi Sr., as a minor. That I would say at the time, I would have been your best case scenario as a minor who was willing to do it. And now realizing I didn't actually have the developmental ability to take all of the information needed into account and decide this for myself. So I decided to write a briefing. And I was joined by some other beautiful people that also shared. I'll put a show notes to the brief in the show notes. But it was really a really impactful time. It was a really impactful journey to write it. I actually wrote about it in the newsletter about what came up for me when I was writing it. So you can go there and read it. I'll also make sure to put that in the show notes. I'm gonna have I would say a lot of things going in the show notes, and gotta write them down or remember them. But this is not the last you're gonna hear about this. I'm actually gonna be having a good friend of mine named Simon. He is the host of the Dear Alana podcast, which was a series about a girl who went through conversion therapy within the Catholic world. And he was one of the people who was a huge support in going through all of this. I'm going to be having him on, and we're going to talk about this law, about conversion therapy, change efforts, minors versus adults, these kinds of things, a little bit of what I talked about in the briefing, and just why it's important to be following this. So I am really looking forward to, I believe that's going to be our next episode. So, kind of like with once before, I thought it was going to be something and not, so don't hold me to that, but I believe that's going to be the next episode. So going forward, I think my plan is going to be do a solo episode like this. And I'm hoping each time it gets a little bit better. If I don't know, hopefully you enjoy these episodes. If not, let me know how to improve them, or just don't listen. No, I'm joking. But I hope to now do a few more interviews and then come back to you again with another solo episode. But I really appreciate you all, honored that you all listened to me. And I'm really excited to be on this journey with you all. I feel it was so funny the last time I came to you guys with the solo episodes going, huh, what am I going to talk about? And I mean, not that I feel like I naturally more had stuff to talk about, but I also was really formulating what was this podcast going to be. And I think even over just these last few episodes, I now understand better what this is and hopefully what it will become. So as always, thank you. Thank you to each of you that is a patron, that gives, and I hope you find the resources on there helpful. If you're looking for that, please go up there and go on over and subscribe. One of the tiers. Join in on the fun. As always, if you love this podcast, please subscribe wherever you listen to on YouTube so you can get alerts when it comes out. New episodes come out on Spotify, on Apple, and wherever you are. Also, please leave a review because that helps more people find it. And that is helpful to me. So if you enjoy it, please do. And as always, I want to thank the Transient Friends for our wonderful theme song, Leave It All Behind. I really love this song. So that is great. And as always, y'all, until next time, keep becoming.